Jumping ahead a little bit just to make some comparisons, to introduce a few Chinese artists who were in dialogue with pop art. At a certain moment in time, it seemed important for certain Chinese artists to be in dialogue with pop art in the late 1980s, early 1990s. That was the moment. And one of the first was Wang Guangyi. This is his Mao Zedong #1 from 1988. So he had several of these images of Mao which were shown in an important early 1989 exhibition of contemporary art in Beijing, the first really public showing of Chinese New Wave art to a wide audience, just for a short while. I'm sorry, it's a rather washed out slide. It's actually a slide made from the original artwork at the time. So Mao, but Mao behind a grid. It's the archetypal images of Mao, perhaps a little bit more like the Tiananmen Square version than the Little Red Book version. But behind a grid, so that has certain kind of associations. A grid is almost like putting him in prison, putting him behind bars, that kind of association. Also as a kind of sense of analyzing, cutting up. There was some problem about displaying an image of Mao. It was already at that point in time, it would have been a very unusual and questionable thing to do. But he got away with it partly because there is he agreed to put some little, or the organizers agreed to put some little explanation by the side saying, this is referencing a kind of rational, analytical kind of looking at history or something like that. And there was a moment where even the Chinese Communist Party itself wanted to reassess the legacy of Mao as part of the internal power struggles of that time, to move beyond it. And so maybe that created a little bit of space for artists to do certain things that at other points in time would not have been possible. It's a difficult thing. You have to create enough space to critique the past to legitimize your own power, but not so much that you'll undermine the whole system that gives you power. Anyway, that's a kind of problem for that kind of system. Putting a grid over something, also, that's something you do if you want to blow something up to a larger scale. It's a common artistic technique of taking your source material and then making a grid at a different scale where you want to blow it up, and then you copy each section by section. It's a good way to not get things wrong. And of course, actually, Wang Guangyi had to do that during the Cultural Revolution himself. He was employed to, amongst other things, making images of Mao as a common activity of the time for artists. So, in the post-Cultural Revolution era, instead of feeling that you just wanted to leave all that behind, instead, for many artists, there was a feeling that they had to work through their feelings. Maybe their feelings are mixed. It's not positive or negative, but ambivalent, and this kind of coolness of the pop style seemed to give them something to work with. And maybe also pop because it deals with imagery. It's suitable for artists who've been trained in very much an imagistic tradition. It allowed them to use their existing skills, but then sort of deconstruct them in a way, rather than simply start again from zero and devalue the skills they had. Instead of, say, if they started to paint, for instance, in an abstract expression style, they might find that it's a very new beginning that their existing training didn't give them much help with. Wang Guangyi, even in the early 1990s, is also using a style that's kind of similar to a kind of pop art style. This is his great criticism series. Many, many images in that series. This is the McDonald's one from 1992. So putting together two kinds of mass imagery, persuasive imagery. One is the persuasive imagery of Western consumerism, and the other is the persuasive imagery of the Cultural Revolution era. Two things which, at one level, they're sort of deeply clashing ideologies: communism, capitalism, consumerism, and serving the people. But on the other hand, also, aren't they a little bit similar in a way, that they're sort of these sort of empty rhetorics trying to get you to do something that you don't really need to do? You don't need those hamburgers. You don't need, to follow the party line or whatever. But that's what you're being asked to do. So it kind of creates, to use a term from Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, a plague on both their houses. Kind of devaluing both by putting them together and seeing how similar they are at the very moment where all this is just happening for the first time. I mean, this would be very much, this was the very year, 1992, the very year where McDonald's first appeared in Beijing. This was the first, when there was only one McDonald's in the whole of mainland China, this was it, at the bottom of Wang Fujing. And now it's gone because there's a big Hong Kong funded shopping mall in the place, a Li Ka-shing shopping mall in the place. So it's really specifying a very particular moment of a funny kind of clash where the old rhetoric is still there in the streets, but the new rhetoric is coming alongside it, and they're sort of incompatible messages in the same public space. This kind of art, I think, quite helpfully sort of talks about that. Again, not telling you what to think. Maybe it's tired of the world where people tell you what to think. It itself doesn't want to tell you what to think. It just presents it. You don't even know what he thinks, really. And there you go. The sad thing is that he's carried on making it even to today, and that sort of kind of undermines it to some extent. He's commodifying his own anti-commodity art, you could say. So, for example, I saw one where the brand was Cartier, and it was the artwork was on display in a Cartier shop. So it's being co-opted by the thing that it's trying to talk about. But just that he was not the only one. Show you one or two others. Of course, it's all a kind of some kind of, at some level, a kind of engagement with Andy Warhol's Mao. So, okay, Mao is Chinese, but a Chinese artist is engaging with Mao via Andy Warhol, taking a cross-cultural trip to come back home to talk about the recent past, the not so distant past. This is Youhan double image 1992. So it's again like, instead of having many Maos, which is what Warhol did in a way, produced many different images of Mao. Here you get that sense of a double images. It's like a sort of misprinted image. It references the processes of reproducing images of Mao. But it's an image gone wrong. Something's gone wrong with this process. It's not working, or there's something bad about it. It's a bad image. Or the Shan, Shanghai-based artist, this is his Rouge series, number 8, 1990. Well, he's taking an iconic portrait of the young Mao, and he's producing a sort of feminization of it. That's a kind of taking away of the power of the political figure by undermining his masculinity, if you like. There are others where he plays up a sort of kind of putting lipstick on the face and things like that. So jumping back to America, looking at other, important American artists of the pop era after that little detour. This is Rosenquist, Smoked Glass, 1962. I would say, different pop artists, they take different types of mass imagery to play with. Rosenquist, the one he's probably most engaging with is billboard art. Maybe the hand-painted billboard is less a common feature today. We still have the equivalent of it, but now a lot of it would become digitized anyway. But in those days, a lot of billboards could be hand-painted, and he himself had the job of hand-painting billboards. He would sort of do that during the day, and then at home he'd go home and make these kind of abstract expressionist style paintings, which was his own real work. And at a certain point he realized, actually, what I'm doing during the day has more potential to play with that kind of imagery. He said at one point, I'd instead of doing these very splashy, brushy works, I've had enough of paint quality because I had paint running down my armpits during the day. He's all making his billboards. He had quite enough of that. So taking these little details, of course, that could be how you would see a billboard if you're up close working on it. You'd see it in terms of detail. This is the creator's viewpoint on art rather than the consumer's viewpoint, looking from down below. And so that may be one thing that's feeding into this principle of bringing together just details. Of course, it all fits in with a broader tendency in 20th century art of a kind of collage principle. Even though it's all painting, it has a feel of being collaged together from different printed sources. It's parasitic on printed imagery. I think of Magritte as well, the surrealist artist Magritte, and how he brings together images from different sources in a very deadpan way, inexpressive way. But unlike Magritte, there's no spark of poetry that when you put these different things together, it's deliberately a sort of bland juxtaposition. In the surrealist era, when different things that don't normally belong together are put together, that creates a sort of strange sense of poetry or the marvelous. But now we don't feel that anymore. Here's another Rosenquist example. I Love You With My Four, 1960 to 61. He wanted very simple forms, very simple subjects that wouldn't have too much strong association. So he says, for example, this is like tinned spaghetti. He said, well, nobody could even get nostalgic about tinned spaghetti, so I'd use that. You can't have some strong feeling associated with it. Sometimes the image would be slightly out of date, so also again it doesn't have much strong association of contemporaneity to it. It's not very of this moment either. That's a little bit like the English artist Caulfield. He liked to do that, slightly out of date imagery in drawing on his interior design magazines. So you wanted a kind of I should read a little bit about what he says. He says, current methods in advertising, sublimation and the hard sell invade our privacy. It's like getting hit with a hammer. You become numb. But the effect can be to move you into another reality. These techniques are annoying in the form in which they exist, but when they're used as tools by the painter, they can be more fantastic. I thought that I would be a stronger painter if I made most of my decisions before I approached the canvas. That way I hope for a vision that would be more simple and direct. Just ready-made imagery, not finding your image in the process of painting. Because this big tin spaghetti is like his equivalent to the Campbell soup can, if you want. But he's showing you what's inside the can, not the can itself. But it also, to me, it has a sort of reference to Jackson Pollock's style of painting. You know, there's some sort of art about art even here. This section in the middle, it's even a little bit hard to say what it is. It's a detail of a face, right? But we can't really quite make it out. We know this is some automobile, you know, from the advertising imagery of trying to get you to upgrade to this year's new model or something like that. Early in the morning, 1963. Again, that sort of collaging principle. Not actual collage, it's handmade, but hand-painted. Here the title does give us a clue. You say, well, in the morning, maybe you get up, you put your clothes on, you comb your hair, you have some orange juice, something like that. That would be the kind of range of associations that could legitimately come together. This is a really large image that he produced. I'm sorry it's only a black and white image that I have. Actually, when it was first displayed, it was displayed around 4 walls of the Leo Castelli gallery. Leo Castelli exhibited a lot of the pop art when it was first coming out. So it's a very large-scale painting. This is F-111 from 1965. F-111 is the name of a particular type of American fighter plane, warplane. And that's probably the main image you see here, connecting across what are otherwise kind of broken sections of painting. You know, various images are imposed on top of it, like the image of a tire, maybe for an advert for a certain tire manufacturer, child under a hair dryer, and there's a kind of nuclear mushroom crowd, ironically with an umbrella. That's not going to help you much to protect you if a nuclear bomb goes off. This is the threat of the post-war era. Finally, mankind in its technological progress has arrived at an era where it has the technological power to destroy human life on the planet altogether. You know, so that's a kind of a threat that it didn't exist before 1945. That's a kind of, we still live with it, but it was a very new threat at that point, the late 1940s, the 50s, the 60s, especially during the Cold War, where people's fingers were hovering over the buttons that could have launched those missiles anyway. So, you know, that threat of annihilation seemed a real thing to be dealing with. Well, the Pollock spaghetti comes back again. So there's some visual rhyming, you know, between the hairdryer and the umbrella. There's some punning or playing at the level of meaning, maybe. This is the very year that Saigon fell and the Americans first started committing troops to the Vietnam War. So there's this question of topicality. Slightly later work, this is from 1973, Slipping Off the Continental Divide. In 1971, there was a car accident and his wife and his son were badly injured, you know, and after that there's a sort of shift in his work. So with these later works, you can often have some kind of biographical association, which you can't really read in the earlier works. So he tells a story that when he was a kid, he used to kind of hide under the stairs and imagine in his grandfather's house, I think it was, and imagine could fly an aeroplane away to faraway places. So that the stare imagery comes from there. This is we see this in the art of Sengai or something like that. The image of the triangle, circle, square. Chinese characters kind of makes you think of that Japanese source, although he's mixed them up. The triangle is in the circle and so forth. So kind of playing with form and meaning. How many people looking at it would know that actually in its initial audience? That's an interesting question. A book that's open. Continental divide means the part of America where where on one side is the east, one side is the west, the Rocky Mountains and so forth. The book represents that, maybe. Should you go east? Well, this is a kind of eastern reference. Or should you go west? Actually, in America, to get to the east, you'd have to go west. But that's Oldenburg, example of a pop artist primarily using sculpture. Jewel Hamburgers, 1962. A little bit different from the others, that he does emphasize this sort of handmade quality a lot of the time, especially in these early works. But taking popular culture, in his case often food, as a starting point. Food is less and less something you make at home from individual ingredients, like a carrot or a tomato or something like that. It's something you buy pre-made in a tin, like Campbell soup, or else you buy it to take away in a restaurant, like a hamburger or something. Floor Cake, 1962. What the image doesn't tell you is the scale. It's actually quite large, so part of the effect of it all is a piece of cake that is massive out of scale. So playing with scale is one thing. Playing between soft and hard is another. He's a pioneer of making soft sculptures. Filled with fabric, filled with filling. Again, I want to think back to Magritte and his playing around with scale. Or you could think back to Dali and his playing around with soft and hard. Things which should be hard become soft in his paintings, like A Melting Clock, most famously. So we're seeing the same thing with Oldenburg. Soft drain pipe, blue, cool version, 1967. Yeah, okay, so it's a drain pipe that it's all sort of soft. It looks vaguely sort of phallic, maybe. Also, it could be like a sort of crucifixion or a lynching or some kind of image of violence, maybe. The connotation is there. That's not expressed directly, but you start reading things into things. Clothespin, a big public sculpture, 1976. Taking a little everyday object, a sort of wooden clothes peg. I guess this is pretty antique now. Now everything's made of plastic, but that's what they used to look like, wood and a bit of metal holding them together. You pinch down the bottom to put things in. but isolated and put into public space at an enormously different scale from the original. It could be said to create a kind of playful, humanizing quality to public space that is otherwise very corporate and anonymous. Of course, it's the corporate people who've chosen to have the sculpture there. I also want to read it as like a kind of image of two people hugging or kissing, something like that. You know, that's how it looks. We can't help but read human figures into things, anthropomorphize things. You know, so I think back to Brancusi's kiss sculpture. The search for a sort of informality and art getting out of the space of the separate space of the gallery into real life is something he talks about in his statements. I'll just read you a little bit to give you the flavour of it. I am for an art that grows up not knowing it is art at all, an art given the chance of having a starting point of zero. I am for an art that a kid licks after peeling away the wrapper. I am for an art that flaps like a flag or helps blow noses like a handkerchief. I am for an art that unfolds like a map that you can squeeze like your sweetie's arm or kiss like a pet dog, which expands and squeaks like an accordion, which you can spill your dinner on like an old tablecloth. Painting which has slept so long in its gold crypts, in its glass graves, is asked to go for a swim, is given a cigarette, a bottle of beer, its hair rumpled, is given a shove and tripped, is taught to laugh. And this is kind of way he talks. Robert Indiana, The American Dream, 1961. Just show you one by him. I'm going to start moving very quickly now to just give a little flavour of things. The kind of imagery that he deals with, different pop artists have dealt with different categories of mass reproduced imagery. In his case, one type that he deals with is road signs. Another is like this would be tilt would be on an old style pinball machine. If you tilt the actual machine, then the game, you lose the game and you get a sign come up saying tilt. Wayne Thiebaud, as a West Coast artist, did a lot of things about food. Refrigerator Pies, 1962. So like Oldenburg in being interested in food, but it's not just food in itself, it's the display of food, you know, food as a commodity, not food just as some basic human need of dealing with hunger. George Segal, Cinema, 1963. Yeah, he made these sort of tableaus with figures in, where the figures are kind of just these plaster casts from life. Ed Ruscha, large trademark with 8 spotlights, 1962. Yeah, another West Coast artist, often dealing with signage. Words are very important, as often words are the only thing in the image, really. then there's this whole phenomenon of photorealism. One of the most famous of such artists is Richard Estes, Diner of 1971. Maybe at first sight it doesn't look like the kind of art you'd want to talk about in the same breath as pop art, but I think it is really. It is sort of painting after photography. You're very much aware you're looking at a painting that's done from photographs rather than done from life. Actually, a lot of painting is like that now. Photography is so pervasive that it's really influenced our vision so much. It's such a useful tool for painters to use that it's very hard to come across painters whose vision is not influenced by photographic vision. So here is an artist who's kind of exploring that and being conscious about that, I think. Chuck Close, Phil of 1969. Phil is Philip Glass, the composer. He's titling it by his first name, so creating a sort of familiarity, and indeed we're up close to him as if we know him well. Again, it's very much painting after photography, I think. Has that feel. The black and whiteness of it references photography, I would say. Photography is one of the few fields where the monochrome still exists as a viable idea. So to use monochrome in painting is a little bit strange, but it sort of references the quality of your photographic source. It has a quality of being a sort of close-up. Actually, close is his name, but it's close-up quality. Getting up very close to the texture of the skin. A little bit too close. You don't normally stand quite that close to someone, and portraits don't usually bring you quite that close to someone. They usually allow a certain distance, appropriate to social interaction. He himself has a kind of problem of facial recognition, some kind of problem that he can't really remember faces very well. So it's interesting that he's focused his whole career on portrait photography. Jumping back to China, just interesting to look at Luo Zhongli's father of 1977. He had seen in a magazine one of Chuck Close's work, so he's trying to apply that kind of extreme detail close-up himself. But in the Chinese context, somehow it's not art about photography. He's using it as a way to kind of destroy the cliches of socialist realism that he'd been trained to use by dialing up the degree of realism to such an extent that it somehow breaks it. Turning up the sound so loud that the speakers break or something like that. It's okay to make paintings of peasants. You're allowed to do that. That's a cliche thing to do. But somehow we're told too much. There's too much information that we can see that his hands have gotten hurt, There's a sense of damage. So it's not a very optimistic image about the new society. What about all those decades of socialism? Surely the life of the peasant is supposed to be a bit better than this. Well, when it was exhibited, the head of the Sichuan Artists Association made him rework it to put a pen behind the ear of the peasant, therefore creating some signifier. Oh, well, if he has a pen, that must mean he can write, which means he must be literate, which equals progress, something like that. So, but somehow it doesn't quite fit everything else that we know in the image. So it's sort of, there's an unsettling conflict going on. English artists, British artists, Malcolm Morley, Cristoforo Colombo, 1965. Just showing all the various kinds of imagery that someone can turn to, influenced by this sort of pop tendency. In this case, you could say it's postcards, or maybe the brochures for cruise lines and things like that. He himself had worked on ships as a younger man. That's part of what goes into this. This is not so well known as some of the other artists. Gertsch, he's a European artist that I think a Swiss artist. This is his Sylvia, 1988. It's a very large scale portrait. Again, it's sort of photorealism, you could say, working from a photograph. I think he never met the subject. His wife met her and thought that she'd make a good model, so he got a whole series of photos. And there's a whole book by someone called Norberto Grammaccini, an art historian, who wrote the book in real time while the portrait was being made. It took a long time to work on it, months and months and months. So that's kind of interesting. There were various pictures of it in the studio showing how he approached it all. A 3D artists who try to work in great detail as well. It's like a 3D equivalent to photorealism. Dwayne Hanson's Florida Shopper, 1973. There are a few artists who do this, like John De Andrea is another one. When you meet these, because they're in 3 dimensions, when you meet them in a gallery, you may even have a double take that you think that they are a real person just standing there. It's maybe a little bit less likely now because the style of the clothes is so dated that maybe it would seem strange. And anyway, he's so famous that we would know we're looking at a Dwayne Hanson work, or even a particular one. But still, there remains that degree of the uncanny about it. Is it art or is it live? The actual clothes and accessories are real, so that ties it to real life. That's not new. Degas had his ballet dancer wearing a real tutu and things like that. Okay, excuse me a minute, we'll move to the PostPop. So I'm looking at more recent, more recent art that also makes use of a kind of pop idiom or engaging with mass culture in some way. Tingueley, looking at an artist who has, he's dealing with the world of machines, the manufactured items and manufacturing. This is his metamechanic sculpture with tripod, 1970. So sometimes he would produce machines that would do things like a machine that would destroy itself, so that becomes a performance. Like that. He also has one machine that makes abstract expressionist type of paintings. They look very individual, but actually they're made by a machine. Arman, French artist, often making use of ready-made objects. There's that dialogue between pop and Dada, like for example, the use of the Mona Lisa by Warhol, and I think it's a productive thing that goes on, and a lot of later artists also come back to, using ready-made objects and presenting them in an art context. In this case, filling a sort of mannequin figure with gloves. So it's all to do with shop display and techniques of manipulating how we approach objects, giving objects a certain aura of consumerist attraction. But it introduces a sort of tactile quality as well. Cesar, he worked in many different styles. Like we have a work by him in Hong Kong, just outside the cultural centre. The so-called, it's called the Flying Frenchman, figure like that, which is interesting. It was commissioned in 1989 and installed in 1991. So it's a figure, a damaged figure. A lot of us think it's an image of the June 4th, 89 protests in Tiananmen Square, that it's a reference to that because of the timing of it all. Anyway, he worked in different idioms. So one thing he did here, this is just taking cars and crushing them. These are cars that were in a war zone and then were taken away. So they have a quality of a sort of being a relic of a certain time and place. I'm just very quickly looking at a few artists that deal with cars. I think it's a kind of important item of consumer culture or modern life, and a lot of artists have dealt with. So looking at sort of having spent a lot of time when we're talking about the original pop artists talking about 2D art, here's a chance to look at artists dealing with consumerism through 3D objects, but juxtaposing different artists treating the same topic, the car, thereby giving a chance to show the differences between them. So John Chamberlain, jackpot of 1962, he made these abstract sculptures out of bits and pieces of wrecked cars. Of course, he himself would also battle, move, further distort and shape the panels to meet his requirements. Yeah, you could map him onto abstract expressionism in a way, but the nature of his subject matter, objects of from modern life, gives it this other dimension as well. Sylvie Fleury, Skin Crime number 303 and number 601, 1997. It's a consumerist object, but it's also a very dangerous thing. A lot of people die in road crashes. So the car is a kind of crushed, dangerous object, but painted in this pink, a little bit like Andy Warhol's lavender, choosing an almost inappropriate color, but it's like the kind of colors that sometimes cars are given, very bright colors to make them saleable. So making a dead car come to life again through repainting it. Charles Ray, Unpainted Sculpture, 1997, same year actually. So again, there's this sense of referencing a moment of disaster. British artist Sarah Lucas, Life's a Drag Organs, 1998, well, just 1 year later, burnt out car wrecks and then covered with cigarettes, which are also, like cars, dangerous things. Namjoon Paik, 32 Cars for the 20th Century, Play Mozart's Requiem Quietly, 1993. Well, the title kind of almost explains the whole thing. There is music coming out from inside the cars. this is the sort of thing that happens due to kind of biennale culture, these kind of big art events, and artists end up producing something on a grand scale to draw attention at such events. Gabriel Orozco, La DS, 1993. The DS is a certain kind of Citroen car, very iconic French car. He's taken it, he's cut it into three, and then joined the two outside parts together, leaving out the middle bit. So it's something familiar made strange. So, as you can see, there's only room for one person to sit behind the wheel now. Instead of making references to the real world, you're using things in the real world itself and changing them. He did that, for example, to an elevator. Take the elevator itself out of the building in which it's normally situated, so we look at it as an object from the outside. He's a very, very diverse kind of artist. He'll come back again when we look at minimalism, as someone who's can even be related to that. But he's also making photographs, and this is his this is the Cats and Watermelons, 1992, and he's at the moment really making more abstract paintings. Let's stop there. We're coming back to look at artists of the 1980s who... That was a moment where there's a kind of revival of the pop spirits, you could say, a sort of simulation art, or kind of art that's also again dealing with popular culture in different ways. And we'll start by looking at this artist, Jeff Koons, who's one of the prime examples of that. So yeah, we'll quickly look at some other examples of post-pop art next week, and then we'll go on to look at minimalism. Very same time frame, but very, very different kind of appearance. Very sparse, abstract imagery, but responding to the same moment. And I think we'll find certain ways in which we can see parallels actually to the 1960s pop art. So this is what I'm doing now with this what I'm calling post-pop art is a little bit like what I'm going to be doing for the whole of the rest of the course. I'll look at some movement, and then I'll look at later tendencies that could be related to that in some way, to see how it brings us up towards the present day to a certain extent. Okay, thanks. So I'll see you on Friday. Should be the barring sickness, it should be the last of our tutorial presentation meetings. We'll see.